I've changed my mind. James Gunn and Zack Snyder's new 2025 meaning photo has convinced me Snyder could totally direct one DCU movie. Zack Snyder spearheaded the DC Extended Universe, and ever since that universe ended with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, it has not seemed likely that the director would return to the franchise. That changed this week, and now many are hoping for a new DC Zack Snyder project in the future. While the director continuing the Snyderverse on Netflix is very unlikely to happen, there is actually one confirmed DC project that Snyder would be a perfect fit for, and I desperately hope he becomes involved with the project soon. The films of Zack Snyder have their fans and their detractors. Even the film Snyder himself considers his best superhero movie is not universally beloved. Still, from 300 to Zack Snyder's Justice League, the filmmaker has made a number of the most important and influential comic book adaptations of all time. While the DCEU eventually fell apart, there were many pieces and ideas of that universe, especially in Snyder's own films, that demonstrate how Snyder could be a perfect fit for an upcoming film in the new DCU. Zack Snyder directing a DC Universe release didn't seem very likely after the DCEU's ending. While Man of Steel was a commercial hit and a decent critical success, the shape of the universe that followed was not to everyone's taste. The film was followed by one of the most important superhero movies in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, which, while it made a great deal of money, did not connect nearly as much as Warner Bros. Had hoped. Following that film's tepid response, the studio worked hard to change the tone of their universe, culminating in Joss Whedon's cut of Justice League and the franchise eventually falling apart. With the disappointment Warner Bros. Seems to have felt about how Snyder shaped a darker, more complex universe that posed the DC heroes as icons of myth and legend, rather than relatable and humorous human beings, it seemed unlikely they would ever want him to return to the franchise. The studio tested if audiences were as interested in his DCEU as the online conversation suggested with commissioning a new cut of Justice League, but it didn't seem to reap a profit for the studio. A Justice League 2 became impossible, and Snyder's DC future has seemed unlikely since. 2025's Zack Snyder and James Gunn reunion photo helps make a Snyder-led DCU movie feel more way possible. Zack Snyder built much of the previous DC universe, and James Gunn is currently at work setting up the new one. The two filmmakers recently connected, with Gunn sharing a picture on X of the two filmmakers catching up. Gunn and Snyder previously worked together on the Dawn of the Dead remake, which Gunn wrote. Despite making very different films, Gunn and Snyder have each shown an aptitude for adapting comic books for the big screen. Many have wondered if this image is a harbinger of things to come. This picture has convinced many that a Gunn and Snyder DC collaboration is set for the near future. One clever poster actually recognized the background of the shared image, noting that it appears that this picture was taken in the DCU's creatives room. This could suggest that work is happening that involves Snyder on a new DC project. Of course, this could wind up being nothing more than a visit from the filmmaker. However, it does give some hope to fans like myself who would love to see Snyder continue working on DC projects. A Zack Snyder DCU movie would make sense for the franchise. Zack Snyder has clearly had a good relationship with Warner Bros. Over the years, even if not all of Snyder's DC films connected as well as some had hoped. Films like 300 were enormous hits for the studio, and Snyder cultivated a long relationship with many of the Warner Bros. Executives and creatives alike. More than that, however, Snyder has a very specific style, and the DCU has promised to be very filmmaker-friendly. This could lead to great opportunities for Snyder to make some interesting projects for the franchise. With filmmakers like Luca Guadagnino and James Mangold attached to the universe, There is clearly a great deal of diversity in the kinds of films that DC will be making. Following this, bringing in someone like Snyder to make something visually exciting and adult-oriented could make sense. The filmmaker has proven himself an enormous fan of the source material and is truly adept at putting together comic book films. Bringing him in to work on a DCU project could be great, especially for an upcoming project. I'm convinced DCU's The Authority movie is genuinely a perfect opportunity for Zack Snyder's DC movie return. When James Gunn announced the first films for the DCU Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters, one of the most compelling films mentioned was The Authority. Based on a comic from around the turn of the century, the comic, previously published under Wildstorm before they were acquired by DC, gave edgier and more contemporary looks at the superhero canon. Darker, more powerful, and more flawed characters were examined, crafting complex stories that have been influential on so many superhero projects since. Zack Snyder would be the perfect fit to make The Authority. The source material subverts much of what people perceive about the Justice League, and Snyder's style and directing history make sense for a project like that. While some did not connect with how dark, human, and brutal Snyder made both Batman and Superman in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, giving Snyder the opportunity to do similar things with less sacrosanct characters could be perfect. The film could fit well within Snyder's aesthetic becoming a notable and strong entry to the DCU. I love Zack Snyder, and I'll watch anything he makes. The director's sensibilities have crafted some of the most visually compelling films of our time, and letting him work within the confines of the new DCU could produce something truly special. While his DCEU films were strong in their own ways, Batman and Superman are such enormous characters that any stories that deviate from their most accessible characterizations will meet some level of obstinance. Allowing Snyder to make something a little less known in the new DC universe is too perfect to resist. Zack Snyder's explanation for DCEU's Superman having no trunks totally justifies the DCU adding them back in. With Superman set to kick off the DCU with a version of the hero that wears trunks over his costume, Zack Snyder's 11-year-old explanation for omitting them in Man of Steel justifies the move. Superman will be released on July 11, 2025, and features David Corenswet in the eponymous role, taking over from Henry Cavill's celebrated depiction of Superman 3 years after he was last seen in the DCEU in Black Adam. Principal photography for Superman wrapped in July, leaving an entire year of post-production to get underway before the DCU launches in earnest. Despite Superman's official costume, reveal consisting of an image that obscured his mid-region, set photos exposed the production's decision to include a pair of red trunks as part of Superman's costume. As was the case before Henry Cavill's iteration was unveiled, these images were released amid spirited debates over whether Superman's trunks are necessary. Wherever fans land, however, Zack Snyder's comments around the time of Man of Steel's release make the DCU's decision completely justified. Zack Snyder's DCEU Superman costume explanation justifies the DCU's changes. Zack Snyder had a decent justification for omitting Superman's external trunks from his suit, beyond the notion that they look kind of silly. In a featurette for the movie from the feed, via YouTube, Snyder stated that making Superman's suit part of Kryptonian fashion made a tradition of wearing external trunks much harder to justify. Thankfully, Snyder's version of Superman's costume is largely celebrated by fans, vindicating his decision. Zack Snyder states the following: "We knew where we're gonna make the suit cultural to Krypton, right? It's going to be a Kryptonian invention, and not the Martha Kent sewn from a blanket version. So once we did that, we knew that we were going to have a whole culture then of people wearing skin suits that were similar to Superman. And I thought, yeah, I don't think a whole country or whole world/planet of people wearing their underwear outside of their pants is gonna be cool. Superman's suit being a Kryptonian invention is a departure from the original Superman lore. In contrast, it seems as though Superman will hone in on a more classic comic-accurate rendition of the character with a suit that is made on Earth, though whether it will be Martha specifically that it remains to be seen. Without the excuse of Superman's suit being an alien custom, Superman could never have justified removing the trunks beyond it being a conscious fashion choice and departure from the comic book standard. Why the DCEU and DCU Superman suits make sense for their respective franchises. The DCEU's Superman was created as part of a grittier interpretation of the DC universe, with the character even breaking his no-killing rule in his debut movie. This made the original brightly colored, sewn-together suit much harder to incorporate, as it would undermine the more austere tone struck by the DCEU. The otherworldly design also gels with Superman's alien identity, which the DCEU makes sure to focus on throughout his big screen appearances.